Hey guys, thanks for watching. I know there are a lot of other couples out there planning their wedding who are like me and trying to keep things as budget friendly as possible, and who instead of hiring a wedding planner might be looking to wedding planning books, which is what I did. I went to the library and bought a whole bunch of wedding planning books only to discover that a lot of wedding planning books actually suck. And so today I want to share with you one book that doesn't suck, a wedding planning book that's not actually a wedding planning book, but that really changed my perspective about planning my own wedding and kind of diverted me away from concentrating on kind of superficial, surface level logistics type things, which are important when you're planning your wedding, don't get me wrong, but refocused me a lot more on the human and emotional and like connection part of wedding planning, which is not only the cheapest or freest part of planning your wedding, but also like the most important part of making your wedding memorable, so you're not like just another wedding in a long line of weddings that your guests just kind of forget about or don't have really strong feelings about in the end. I don't actually know when my wedding's gonna be because of the global situation happening now, but I hope that eventually when I do have my wedding, I'll be able to implement these tips from The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, the greatest event planning / wedding planning book that I've ever read. So go out and get it, guys. I'll put a link down below if you're interested. Today I'm gonna tell you the tips that I thought were the best, but there are so many more and so much interesting information in this book, so I just can't do it justice. I'm gonna try my best. My name's Brittany. This whole channel is about my wedding planning and like things that I think are cool about weddings. So if you like this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, follow me along. All right, so the first thing I learned from this book is first decide why you're having a wedding. I know, this seems really obvious. I'm having a wedding because we want to get married. But according to Priya Parker, that's not a good enough reason for having a wedding. When you start asking yourself this question, why are we getting married or why are we having a wedding, you might be surprised that things come up such as, that's just what we do. That's what people do, they get married. Or in my family, that's what we do, we have a wedding. After you date for X amount of years, you get married. But that's not really a good enough reason to have a wedding. You could just go to the courthouse and do that, right? So if you're really honest with yourself, you'll come out with things like, we want to get our families together. We want our families to all meet each other because we want everyone to have a good relationship. That's the purpose. That maybe that, not for everybody, but an example is that. Everything starts with why. Why are we doing this? And you gotta have a clear purpose in the beginning so that everything else will be easier when you start planning the nitty-gritty details. Parker says in the book to make purpose your bouncer, and I really like that because it helps you later on in your wedding planning. She says, when in doubt about any element, even the smallest detail, hark back to that purpose and decide in accordance with it. Every little decision that you make in your wedding ceremony and the choices you make for music, every kind of little detail, you can always go back to why are we having this wedding? What's the purpose of our wedding? And all of those decisions will be a little bit easier for you to make, and it will all feel much more cohesive. Another fabulous and maybe controversial lesson that I learned from this book is that excluding guests from your wedding can actually be considered generous. We're always taught that the more the merrier, that we shouldn't exclude people, but according to this book, by excluding people from your event, you're actually helping to make the event more meaningful and to protect the purpose of the event. When we think of any events in life, we know that especially when we have a smaller group of people, just having some extra people there can really change the vibe of the whole event. And when you have people at your wedding who maybe you felt obliged to invite, or they're not doing anything wrong, they're not negative people or people who you don't like, but they're just kind of there because you felt like you needed to invite them and they don't really contribute to the purpose of your wedding, that does negatively affect how your wedding is going to play out in the end and whether or not your wedding is going to reach that goal, is going to be successful in that original purpose that you set out for yourself. So actually having a reason for every single person that you invite to your wedding is super important, and it's not being selfish, you're actually being generous to those guests you are inviting and to the purpose of your wedding. A lot of the advice that I read in Priya Parker's book sounded kind of counterintuitive, and that's true of this third point as well, which is don't be a chill host. Don't be a chill wedding planner. So this goes against what a lot of us are taught, which is you don't want to be a bridezilla, which is also true, but you also don't want to be a complete chilla. No disrespect to the bride chilla community, who I love, but you don't want to be so chill in your wedding planning that other people fill the void and become kind of like dictators because you decided not to make the harsh decisions. So what you want to do is to be kind of a generous authoritarian. You want to be authoritative in your decision making in the events leading up to your wedding and also on the wedding day itself, or to kind of appoint someone to be your proxy in this in the form of a wedding planner. And you want to do this with your guests in mind. So always having the best interests of the people who you're inviting to your wedding, and also the purpose of your wedding, which is for yourself and your fiance as well. Having all of this always at the center of your thoughts, and not being so chill that other people will step in and negatively impact your guests and the purpose of your event. Now, there are 1,000 examples of this, but imagine like your uncle who's giving a toast and is going on way too long, even though you told him he only had 3 minutes and that he was supposed to avoid certain topics. That would be a time when you, or maybe your wedding coordinator, would step in and protect all of your other guests and protect the purpose of your event by stopping that way too long toast. That's kind of an extreme example, but in all of your decisions, you don't want to just give over your decision-making privileges or just let other people do whatever they want, thereby possibly threatening the purpose of your wedding. And so, of course, the flip side of this is don't be an ungenerous authoritarian, or don't be a bridezilla. I think we all already know this, but basically don't use people, don't control people just for your own sake. This whole mantra of like, it's my day, I can do whatever I want, I don't agree with this. I don't think that the author of this book agrees with that. If you do subscribe to that philosophy, great, good for you. But I kind of tend to think that we need to think of more people outside of ourselves, even on our wedding day. Our wedding day isn't really just about us if you're going to be inviting guests to your wedding. Once you've invited guests into your kingdom, you have to treat them with respect, and you have to have them in mind, their comfort. That includes both their physical comfort and their mental comfort. The greatest gift that this book has given us is this next tip, which is don't focus on the logistics of things, aka the Martha Stewart approach. Don't just focus on the flowers and the food. Focus on the logistics of people, the logistics of human connection. Too many times when we're planning our wedding, we just expect this to be automatic, that people will get to know each other, that they'll have a good time, and often they do. But how many times have you left a wedding feeling like you only hung out with the 2 people you came with, that nothing was super memorable, that you didn't feel like you were an important part of that wedding, and so you just kind of left and it was nice, but nothing super memorable, nothing to write home about. It doesn't have to be that way. For any wedding that you go to, you should feel part of it. You should feel special as a guest. You can leave that wedding feeling like, oh my God, that was the best time I ever had. And the host can do that for you. The way to do it is to establish human connection, to think about how we can include our guests in our wedding and to make them feel like they're an important part of it, because they are. Why else would we be inviting them? So have an equally comprehensive plan for connecting your guests as you do about placing your flowers wherever they're gonna be in your wedding. So how do we do this? How do we add that human connection element to our wedding? How do we do the logistics of people? That's gonna be the next step, the next tip from the book. Parker, the author of this book, says that your wedding event, or your event in general, starts the moment that your guests first hear about it. So priming your guests, pre-gaming your guests before your wedding day is really essential. According to the book, 90% of what makes an event successful is put into place beforehand. And of course we know this is true with the logistics of things, but how is this possible with people? So that's why things like welcome events are really important. I know not everybody has the opportunity to do that, but having a rehearsal dinner or a welcome event where your guests can get to know each other beforehand, having them wear name tags is really helpful. Doing introductions, so knowing who is there at the event, knowing that you're important and that people know your name is really special and goes a long way toward making sure that your guests have a lot of fun at your event. If they're well known and they feel like they're special and important, they will have a good time. If you're willing to put in the time and effort, you could even make the centerpieces at each of the tables at your wedding a way of bringing the guests at that table together. So you could have the centerpieces be like photos of all of the guests that are sitting at that table, as well as like little printed stories or fun facts about everybody who's sitting at that table, or maybe like a little printout of your relationship with each person at the table. Let your guests, give them some kind of fun little activity or purpose that can really help them connect on things that they have in common, that can help them make a deeper connection than just like talking about the weather and how they arrived to the event. I love this next tip, which is don't start the event by talking about logistics. I think most weddings do this correctly. So imagine the wedding ceremony is about to start. The bride comes down the aisle. She looks amazing. Everyone's like in tears. Emotions are really heightened at that moment, and the first words that are going to be spoken are so important. I think there are studies that show that whatever experiences we have in life, we always remember like the first 5% and the last 5%. So beginnings and endings are really important for your wedding or for any event in life. And that also means that those first words need to be special, need to be important. So it's a real shame when the officiant opens his or her mouth in the first second of all of this beauty that's happening and says something like, "The ceremony will be followed by a reception at blah blah blah. I was just informed that there's a 97 Chevy double parked in the parking lot. If someone could please remove it." Like, it just kills the moment. So make sure that you use that first sentence, that you tell your officiant to use that first sentence to jump right into the special part of the ceremony. The next tip is also about your guests and is super important, and it is simply to honor and awe your guests. Like I said in the beginning, your wedding is not all about you, it's also about the comfort and fun of your guests. I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you already know that. So how do you honor and awe your guests? Not with a bunch of really expensive activities, like a photo booth that costs you a bunch of money. No, like how you can do this is really simple and free for the most part. Introduce people a lot. Give them compliments. Compliment your guests in front of other guests whenever you have the opportunity. If you're having a giant wedding and you don't feel like this is feasible, I refer back to the centerpiece activity. Have lots of activities that can show off your guests' accomplishments and can compliment them and kind of show them in a good light to the other people who are there at your wedding. You can do this with a Find Someone Who game. If you don't know what that is, just Google it. It's like just like a really fun game. Don't be afraid to have fun games and activities. And it doesn't have to be goofy, but just like little things during your wedding and hopefully in the events leading up to your wedding. Keep the purpose in mind. The purpose is to connect humans at your wedding. So always think of and choose activities that can show people as their best selves and make them feel good and can open them up to others. Another thing that definitely helps with this is to be really thoughtful about the seating placement and to always do seating. Even if you're having a small wedding, if there's any kind of seated dinner going on, it's a really good idea to place people and to place them thoughtfully. Seat people next to each other who have something in common. Don't be afraid to mix people up, but make sure that they have something in common, some common interest with the person or people who are sitting next to them, and then let them know what they have in common. Let them know what that is so that they can discuss those things. Make sure that they're properly introduced or that there's some kind of activity where they can introduce themselves, and make sure it's enjoyable and that they can really connect. The next amazing tip I want to share from this book is to create a temporary alternative world in your wedding. So what Parker suggests is to replace etiquette, everyday etiquette that we all kind of know while existing in our cultures, to replace that with pop-up rules, which are rules that exist only for a short amount of time for a specific event. And the reason for this is that more and more in modern times that we live in, people are coming from all different backgrounds and cultures, and sometimes this is really obvious, sometimes it's a little bit less so. Old folks and teenagers are part of two different cultures, and so sometimes etiquette rules can make people feel really left out because older folks and teenagers have different rules of etiquette in their heads. However, when you introduce pop-up rules, which are temporary rules that everybody is told the day of the event or leading up to the event, even better, it puts everybody on the same playing field and it makes everybody feel comfortable being part of that temporary world. And you have the opportunity to do this with your wedding. So it can be really simple rules such as no technology during the ceremony. It can be some fun short rules that you have throughout the day, such as everybody must talk to 5 other people who they've never spoken to before and has to like fill out a little card with information about each of those 5 people. You can implement little rules that everybody maybe will grumble a little bit when they first hear about it, but will ultimately really appreciate and love, and will leave feeling much more fulfilled, having felt like they were part of something. They were part of this temporary world. They could all understand the rules really easily and nobody felt left out. Bottom line, try implementing some pop-up rules into your wedding. And make sure your rules are not oppressive, that they're fun and that everybody will be excited and willing to participate in. Which of course goes back to being a generous authoritarian and not a bridezilla. Finally guys, the last tip I want to share from this book is to accept that there is an end. Accept that there is an end to your wedding and break up with your guests at the end of the night. All great events in life have a clear, delineated ending, where there's a nice speech or a nice send-off of some kind. So try to incorporate that into your wedding. It doesn't mean that the party has to stop, but make sure you have something towards the end of the night that sort of signals this is the end and that you're very thankful and grateful that everybody was there to join you. Parker suggests not just sort of letting it end and devolve and sizzle out, but that you actually make a clear ending where you thank people, you talk about how wonderful it was that they could all be there, and just a marker to mark the end of the event. As I said guys, there are a million lessons in this book and examples that I could never do justice to, so I really suggest you pick up a copy of this. And also please let me know in the comments if this was helpful for you in planning your own wedding.